Welcome back. This is the second video out of 4 from the ebook Trump, the Magnificence of America. Nobody's a Picture Perfect. We continue in Chapter 4, entitled Trump Protects Muslims Also. If Mr. Trump had the intelligence reports that President George Bush had prior to 9/11, the Trade Center attack would more than likely never have happened that day. There would have been no Iraq war, no Syrian war, no Libyan war. There would be no mass Muslim migration into Europe, and potentially worse here if not stopped. The first point is Mr. Trump has more integrity than to lower himself to destabilize sovereign nations by using terrorist groups to cause civil wars and fight proxy wars. Mr. Trump wants a large enough military so that no one will mess with the United States. A peace through strength agenda, which is why he is nominated for the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize. So far, with those wars in Iraq, Syria, and Libya never occurring, millions of Muslims would still be alive. Take Syria, for instance. If you listen to the average Syrian prior to the war there, they would tell you that they had one of the highest standards of living of the Muslim world and a more secular government than most other Muslim nations. Even after the Russians bombed the areas held by rebel groups that the United States supported and ISIS, the Syrian people were welcoming back the Syrian government forces and thanking Russia. When you read John Stockwell's lecture that I directed the readers to check out, he says in there, the CIA prepares 4 statements prior to press time, 15 minutes to press time. They give the media a statement to read, and all 4 statements are lies. That's exactly what he said. The majority of Americans only know the lies the media passes on from the CIA and others with this establishment direction. The United States knew exactly what would happen if these 3 dictators were deposed, exactly what you see today, total anarchy in Libya and Iraq and Syria. Just like Donald Trump said about the power vacuum that would develop. When you look at strong-armed dictators like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, people say they are evil and need to go. What type of leaders should be in a nation where a portion of the people follow a Salafi Wahhabi belief system of Islam? It calls for a worldwide caliphate and to kill anyone that doesn't believe as they do. Islam is the most violent ideology, estimated 270 million innocent people murdered in 1,400 years that's ever been upon the face of the earth. The Salafi Wahhabi sect drives the Islamic agenda. If the so-called peaceful sects controlled its direction, they would stop the barbaric agenda. What do the peaceful sects do to stop the violence? Essentially nothing of any importance. A recent survey in England showed 2 out of 3 Muslims said they won't report terrorist activities to authorities. So at least they condone it or they would stop them, instead of allowing the Salafi Wahhabi sects to blend back in with the main group. As for another reason, Mr. Trump wouldn't have a problem taking out Osama bin Laden. Mr. Trump doesn't have a conflict of interest involving the bin Laden family. Obviously, Mr. Bush must have. I was watching C-SPAN during the coverage of the 9/11 trials, and FBI Special Agent Robert Wright said while testifying that he had been gagged and could not reveal the true extent of what he knew about the Bush-bin Laden connection and 9/11. His lawyer stepped up and said live on C-SPAN that the Bush family vacations with the bin Ladens. At least Mr. Trump knows where to start his prosecuting when he reopens 9/11. At last count, I saw where Congress has 47 impeachable offenses against President Obama. Once again, you see the establishment Congress that does nothing against its own criminals. But Donald Trump says bad words, so he's not qualified to be president. He tells the truth and hates the evil that the establishment has done to the people of this country and the people of the world. That's why he isn't qualified. He's not evil enough. Mr. Trump said 4 years ago that the oil fields, which ISIS used to make billions of dollars for their war effort, should be bombed. Why did it take years for the U.S. government to employ this tactic? Here's what happened when the U.S. military finally did bomb ISIS tankers. In November of 2015, the U.S. military bombed 116 ISIS tanker trucks. This is from the DoD press briefing from Baghdad, Iraq. Colonel Steve Warren said to reporters, quote, France has conducted numerous strikes against targets in Raqqa, the capital of the Islamic State, in Al-Bukamal, we destroyed 116 tanker trucks, which we believe will reduce ISIL's ability to transport its stolen oil products. This is our first strike against tanker trucks, and to minimize risk to civilians, we conducted a leaflet drop prior to the strike. We did a show of force we had the aircraft essentially buzz the trucks at low altitude. The leaflets, which fluttered to the ground 45 minutes before the strikes, simply said, "Get out of your trucks now and run away from them. Warning, airstrikes are coming. Oil trucks will be destroyed. Get away from your oil trucks immediately. Do not risk your life." The decision to drop warnings came after they assessed that the trucks, while they are being used for operations that support ISIL, they're probably just civilians. We had to figure out a way around that. We're not in this business to kill civilians. We're in this business to stop ISIL, to defeat ISIL. Stupid me. I thought, that's the end of quote. Stupid me. I thought this was supposed to be a war. I guess a lot has changed since I left Fort Bragg in the 1980s. I also couldn't help but notice the shiny new Toyota trucks and advanced weapons ISIS has. Where did they come from? In June 2015, CNBC reported that so far the United States has accidentally furnished the Islamic State with $219.7 million worth of weapons, vehicles, and other military supplies and gear, and that's only what we know about. Here is that list, and remember this is from June of 2015, and that list far exceeds this today. And here's the list that was reported by CNBC in 2015 that the United States had, quote, accidentally supplied ISIS with. 74,000 Army machine guns at $4,000 each, totaling $29 million. 52 M198 howitzer mobile gun systems at $527,337 each, total of $27 million. 2,300 Humvee armored vehicles at $70,000 each, $16 million total. And 40 M1 Abrams tanks at $4.3 million each, $172 million total. Just how did ISIS acquire these weapons? And this is continuing from the CNBC article of June 2015. Just how did ISIS acquire these weapons? First, accidental airdrops of weapons and supplies intended for the Syrian Kurds into Islamic State territory. This didn't happen just once, but several times. Second, weapons and supplies seized by ISIS during the falls of Mosul, Iraq, Ramadi, Iraq, and Palmyra, Syria. For what it's worth, I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in the 1980s, took part in Desert Shield to lead up to Desert Storm. For almost 3 years, I spent most of my time in the drop zones at Fort Bragg in support of 82nd Airborne, 18th Airborne Corps, 7th Special Forces, and occasionally Delta Force. I was in those drop zones all the time, and very seldom did high-altitude personnel jumps land off the drop zone. I never witnessed any off-target more than 100 yards out of the drop zone. The heavy equipment drops, like tanks, were dropped with the plane only feet off the ground. The tank or other heavy equipment is rolled out the back of the plane. The parachutes are attached at the end of the load to slow its forward momentum. These air crews are experts and never miss, and besides, if they did a low-altitude drop accidentally in ISIS territory, the plane would never have made it away. Before we get back to the terrorist action in Syria, Iraq, and Libya, let's look at an MSNBC interview from 1998. The interview was with Lieutenant General William Odom, the director of the National Security Agency under Ronald Reagan. Lieutenant General William Odom stated, quote, "Because the United States itself has a long record of supporting terrorists and using terrorist tactics, the slogans of today's war on terrorism merely makes the United States look hypocritical to the rest of the world. By any measure, the United States has long used terrorism. In 1978 and 1979, the Senate was trying to pass a law against international terrorism. In every version they produced, the lawyers said the United States would be in violation. Articles like this show the establishment never changes. Both Democrat and Republican, 15 years worth. Now you see why they're trying to stop Donald Trump from the presidency. He could prosecute them for crimes against humanity if he gets a chance. But we are far from finished. Stick around for the big establishment confession. We now move back to the latest establishment terrorist war, with articles you might have seen covered on globalresearch.ca or memorative.org and many others. Here's an advisor to Iraq's parliamentary speaker, Wada al-Jumali, and he stated, quote, in relation to the fall of Ramadi into ISIS's hands, whether this was the result of treason, neglect, or conspiracy, or a regional or international plot, even the international coalition has played a bad role. People saw the intentional coalition dropping weapons for ISIS. They dropped heavy weaponry to the forces of terrorism in Ramadi. This is an act of treason by the international coalition's forces, end quote. That's not the first time Iraqi politicians have accused U.S. coalition forces of dropping weapons and aid to ISIS. It's a phenomenon that's been going on for some time now. In another incident, 2 British planes were shot down by the Iraqis under charges they were dropping weapons to ISIS. Photographic evidence was taken of the planes. Iraqi parliamentarian Jom Divan stated, quote, the international coalition is only an excuse for protecting ISIL and helping the terrorist group with equipment and weapons. The coalition has not targeted ISIL's main positions in Iraq, so let's just move, that's end quote. So let's just move ahead with the establishment confession. Just a quick sidebar, as John Kerry travels Europe, crowds show up to protest the United States' role in the current Middle East war. While visiting Italy in February, a female reporter attacked him while screaming, "You created ISIS." She tried to punch him in the face and was carried out by security. Well, bravo for her. She did her homework. She got the memo. Ding, 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 we have a winner. What does our garbage media tell us? One of the 4 lies written by the CIA, that they were given 15 minutes before press time. And all of those who support the establishment said, amen. The confession comes in the form of a declassified report obtained by Judicial Watch entitled 2012 Defense Intelligence Agency Document, West will facilitate the rise of Islamic State in order to isolate Syrian regime. On Monday, May 18, 2015, the watchdog group Judicial Watch published formally classified documents obtained from the United States Department of Defense and the State Department through a federal lawsuit. This Defense Intelligence Agency document circulated in 2012 before the rise of ISIS. Here's a brief overview of what you will see when you read it. This document was distributed in the Department of Homeland Security, Department of the State, DIA, FBI, CIA, Secretary of State, and CENTCOM, among others. It states, the West, Gulf states, and Turkey want to see an Islamic State established in eastern Syria to affect the West's policy in the region and possibly overthrow the Assad government. It also states this Islamic State would be a strategic asset of the West, Gulf states, and Turkey. There's a lot more in there. Please go read for yourself. The Levant report carries it also, as do many others by now, I'm sure. How do you take care of a strategic asset? Well, you supply it. Don't attack its oil for years. Give leaflets to the truck drivers 45 minutes before you attack their convoy. Only drop munitions on 25% of your military sorties. Move a lot of ISIS fighters to Libya, and we will see what other African nations come under attack from ISIS next. Move over 5,000 ISIS fighters to Europe with, quote, refugees, and set up training camps in the heart of Europe. That's according to Europol in a warning issued in January. Also bring over 1,000 ISIS fighters to the United States with refugees. The FBI has 1,000 current active probes in the United States on ISIS terrorists. That begs the question then, which is more evil, ISIS or its creators? Every article covered should help you, the reader, to fully understand why the establishment does not want Donald Trump anywhere near Washington, D.C. This Department of Homeland Security whistleblower came out in early February and was covered on The Hill, Fox News, Newsmax, WorldNet Daily, and others. The agent, Philip Haney, revealed in early 2009, I was ordered by my supervisors to delete or modify several hundred individuals tied to or designated Islamic terror groups like Hamas from the important federal database, the Treasury Enforcement Communications Systems, TEX. These types of records are the basis for any ability to connect dots. Every day, DHS Customs and Border Protection officers watch entering and exiting many individuals associated with known terrorist affiliations. They look for patterns. Excuse me. Enforcing a political scrubbing of records of Muslims greatly affected our ability to do that. Even worse, going forward, my colleagues and I were prohibited from entering pertinent information into that database. On Fox News, Mr. Haney also stated, in regard to the San Bernardino shooting, DHS could have potentially prevented the San Bernardino attack, but was called off the investigation, citing the administration was more concerned about the civil rights and liberties of foreign groups with terrorist ties than the safety and security of Americans. The Free Beacon, Universal Press, and others carried this story. It said, quote, that for months, members of Congress have been trying to get information from the Obama administration on the immigrant histories of a growing number of foreign-born terrorists operating within the United States and has been stonewalled, end quote. As one official said, quote, and one can only imagine for every identified terrorist, there are many more individuals around them who are radicalized, extreme, or otherwise detracting from American society in ways beyond the threat of terrorism alone, end quote. So, of course, it's no surprise to see WorldNet Daily, globalresearch.ca, Australian National Review.com, and many others news outlets carry articles about how the United States trained ISIS members in Jordan in 2012. Coincidentally, of course, the same year the defense intelligence documents circulated throughout all the establishment departments in Washington, D.C., telling how the West, Gulf states, and Turkey want to see an Islamic State established in eastern Syria, and this Islamic State would be a strategic asset of the West. Since terrorists are willingly being left into the country and record scrubbing has occurred, when do you think their mission or missions will be carried out? The United States has used various groups within Islam as far back as 1952 to destabilize and overthrow nations. Perhaps they will be used this time to bring about the North American Union. More on that later. I've noticed that Mr. Trump's support among Muslim voters has increased from 7 to 11% from January to April of 2016, the highest of any GOP candidate. Even though Mr. Trump wants to temporarily ban Muslims from entering the United States and sending back Syrian refugees. Why is that? Even Louis Farrakhan, leader of the Nation of Islam, whom doesn't support Mr. Trump, supports a Muslim ban. Well, if you listen to our media, everything is peachy keen in Europe and not much is happening. If you look at articles in Europe, you will see ones like this. 25% of Germans want illegal immigrants shot trying to cross the border into Germany. Europol warns 5,000 ISIS fighters in Europe and training camps set up in its heart. Norway's prime minister warns, if Sweden falls, Norway will forcibly shut borders and rescind Geneva Convention. Swiss Army chief states World War III will be fought in Europe in the next few years. Needless to say, Islam is living up to its reputation in Europe. Even 20 years of lies of multicultural diversity programming couldn't make way for the most violent ideology on the face of the earth. The estimates of the murders for the top four ideologies are 270 million for Islam in 1,400 years. Christianity is 250 million in about 2,000 years. Communism is 100 million since 1917, and Nazism 25 million. How long will it take for the number one and number two most violent ideologies to clash in the West? Well, by the looks of what's been going on in Europe, not too long. Did you know that over 80% of Syrians believe that ISIS was created by the United States? So, of course, bring the Syrians to the nations they believe created ISIS. And can even read it on the government's own documents, and can even read it in the government's own documents how they wanted to facilitate the Islamic State rise and use it as a strategic asset. I can't see a majority of Syrians radicalizing once they get to the West, can you? Oh, just a guess, 80%. Well, anyway, groups like Open Borders and globalists like Rupert Murdoch and George Soros that have had a big hand in the destruction of Europe and want the same thing for the United States, only one man stands in their way. That's Donald Trump. Please watch Europe over the summer. Well, that summer's come and gone. Like I said, this ebook was written back in January, beginning of February. So Germany, and this is continuing with the book, Germany is expected to get 500,000 more immigrants and Italy 400,000 more. I'm not sure about the rest, but by the way it looks, my picks for the first nations to fall to Islam will be Sweden or Denmark. The three most likely for civil war to erupt is Germany, France, or England. The interesting thing in that is there will be almost a media blackout here in the United States, or just twisted lies. The nation of France has recently announced they will begin closing between 100 and 160 mosques because they found gun caches, bombs, and ISIS propaganda. I'm really shocked. Our establishment leaders have always said Islam is a religion of peace. I bet it'll be a peaceful time in France if they bulldoze all those mosques. When Donald Trump did an interview in the French magazine Valeurs Actuelles, he stated, if they don't handle the situation of the migrants competently and firmly, yes, it is the end of Europe. When you watch videos online of Muslim clerics speaking from the Middle East and Europe, referring to the millions of migrants fleeing to the West, the clerics state, the West has two choices, either assimilate to Islam or declare war on Islam. Since the November murders in France that were carried out by cowardly Islamic terrorists, the nation of France has been under martial law. Of course, they changed the name to a state of emergency now, and it's extended until the end of May. Well, it's October. It's still going. France has recently declared that the military is going to be getting rid of the undesirables in a civil war type action. So we'll see when that kicks off. The undesirables, meaning the Muslims. We'll see how that goes. And Sweden is just a horrible mess. It's the rape capital of Europe, second largest percentages of rape worldwide behind Johannesburg, Africa, South Africa. Back to the book. Okay, so, of course, they changed the name to a state of emergency. Now it's extended until the end of May. This is obviously what the globalists and establishment puppets want worldwide, and Islam is being used as a pawn in the game to assure this. They have been led into a trap in the West, basically, and will be used to cause civil wars in the West so that martial law can be established and the real government that the globalists wanted all along would be instituted. That is the short answer as to why Donald Trump has the only plan to keep both Americans and Muslims safe, place a ban on Muslim travel to the United States, and send back the Syrian refugees. This will short out the globalist establishment plan that is now unfolding in Europe from happening here. That's why I keep saying, do your research on Europe. That is what's planned for the United States. This is one angle here that I haven't seen covered yet, but it answers why the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and Kuwait will not take refugees. The history of this pact started in 1744, when a man by the name of Ibn Abd al-Wahhab created the most violent sect of Islam, which ISIS subscribes to today. It is known as Wahhabi or Salafi. Ibn Abd al-Wahhab was expelled from Guyana because of his teaching of the Wahhabi Salafi doctrine, which is so violent. He was invited to stay and settle in neighboring Diriyah by its ruler, Muhammad bin Saud. After some time in Diriyah, they struck an agreement together. They would bring the Arabs of the peninsula back to the true principles of Islam as they saw it. This is the pact that is still in effect today. This is from A History of Saudi Arabia by Madawi al-Rashid. And we continue. The ruler Ibn Saud said, "This oasis is yours. Do not fear your enemies. By the name of God, if al-Najd was summoned to throw you out, we will never agree to expel you." Ibn Wahhab replied, "You are the settlement's chief and wise man. I want you to grant me an oath that you will perform jihad, which is a struggle to spread Islam, against the unbelievers. In return, you will be imam, leader of the Muslim community, and I will be leader in religious matters." Muhammad bin Saud was setting up the first provinces of what is now Saudi Arabia. This is why the Gulf states took no refugees. The refugees are on hijra, or migration, just as the 1744 Pact states. It is a form of jihad, to take Islam to the unbelieving West. So it's no wonder Saudi Arabia funds 80% of the major mosques in America. Mr. Trump said he needs to find out what's going on with Islam. If the Saudi Arabian funding is cut off, they will have a harder time teaching the Salafi Wahhabi doctrine in American mosques. If you check in the Saudi Arabian-funded mosques in America, you will more than likely find what was found in the French mosques, only a lot more. Once again, Mr. Trump has the only plan to shortcut or to short-circuit this hijra which is occurring. This is why Donald Trump's poll numbers are growing with Muslims. The educated Muslims see what is coming for them in this hijra. The only candidate that can keep them safe is Donald Trump. Chapter 5. Excuse me. Trump versus Pope. Before we look at another establishment figure that attacked Mr. Trump, let's define what establishment is. It is basically a group of or institution in society that exercises power and influence over matters of policy, beliefs, direction, and seen as resisting change. The establishment institutions on this earth are compartmentalized and seek to control information and direction of society. There is establishment history, science, government, religion, media, medical, and others. In order to work in one of these areas, say at a degree level, a person has to go along with the acceptable prevalent view. If they don't, it will be very hard for them to find work. That's why it's so hard for Mr. Trump to win the job of president. The establishment Democrats and Republicans that have flushed this country down the globalist toilet and have committed countless heinous crimes in doing so and desperately don't want a president that loves this country to be elected. The reason why Donald Trump is so important to so many on the political front is because the average American has been ignored by the governmental establishment in this country for what seems like forever. He's most people's only hope to be heard again in this country. That leads us to Mr. Trump's next encounter with an establishment official, Pope Francis. As usual, Mr. Trump is just minding his own business on the campaign trail the week prior to the South Carolina primary, and a reporter asked Pope Francis about the wall Mr. Trump is proposing to build while the Pope is in Mexico visiting. Pope Francis responded in part by stating, "And then a person who thinks only about building walls, wherever they may be, and not building bridges is not Christian." I heard that and I thought, wow, that guy has a lot of nerve attacking Mr. Trump. I can't fathom how any pope could show themselves in public, let alone attack someone on their beliefs. The Roman Catholic Church has always been one of the most corrupt institutions on the face of the earth. Let's just take a quick look. As we look at the past atrocities committed by papal authority, the vast amount of the 250 million people murdered by Christianity can be credited to the popes in history. We start with atrocities against the ancient pagans. Then there were the Crusades to the Holy Land. Then came the heretics, the witches. Then the wars between the 15th and 17th century. After that, the Jews, the native peoples, the Catholic extermination camps of World War II, and the Rwandan massacres. If you study any of these eras, you will see they did at one time or another everything you see ISIS doing today. These atrocities mostly were done with the blessing of papal authority. The Catholic Church at the end of World War II helped many Nazis escape Europe in what became known as the rat lines. What about the priests throughout history and even today that continue to sexually abuse little boys? How about the 4th century Catholic scribe and translator Jerome, along with others, that incorporated or syncretized various pagan religions into the Hebrew Scriptures? These changes are still in effect today, and we will look at some of them in the next book. Pope Francis could rail against these injustices and lies, but he says nothing. Instead, he attacks Donald Trump about a wall he wants to build. Well, then in that case, why did Pope Leo IV create the Leonine Wall, completely surrounding the Vatican Hill? Answer. Back in 846 of the Common Era, the Saracen Muslim raiders looted St. Peter's Basilica and the Papal Basilica of St. Paul, and in the 15th and 16th centuries, additional defenses were added. Anyone can view the 39-foot wall online. Some sites try to say the Vatican Hill doesn't have a complete wall around it. There are walkways with guards where tourists, etc., can walk under the wall, but these walkways can easily be blocked if need be. I think the tourist site romeitaly.ca should know. What do they say? Vatican City is surrounded by a fortress which over the years has protected the popes from their enemies. But we, the average people, obviously don't deserve any protection according to Pope Francis's comments to Donald Trump, typical establishment sentiments toward the people. As Pope Francis said about Donald Trump, and then a person who thinks only about building walls wherever they may be and not building bridges is not Christian. Thank you for clarifying that to us, Pope Francis. Please tear down your walls around Vatican Hill. I know for a fact Italy will be receiving 400,000 more Muslim immigrants in the next few months. Show us, the world, how to build bridges. Make the Vatican great for the first time. Trump for Pope 2025. And that is the end of the second video. And we will come back shortly with 3 and 4, where it starts to get really good. Thank you for listening.